couple of weeks. It's kind of amazing everything that's happening right now. We talked about what they might be doing regarding Donald Trump here coming up, and I'm going to talk about that today. And what I've actually heard is the end game. So you're going to want to pay attention to this, the end game here. That it's not just going to stop with an indictment in New York. So you're going to want to stay tuned here for that. We also have on the show later today, John Guandolo from Understanding the Threat. We're going to be talking about not only the Southern Poverty Law Center, but we're going to be talking about the Chinese infiltration of the White House. Right now, as we are in a time where other countries view America as weak, we have to understand that a lot of the attacks, the first wave of attacks, especially regarding what we would call the Maoist insurgency model, are coming from within. And as a result of that, we have to be really pressing into when somebody throws out an epithet, throws out some sort of a smear, where it's coming from and what the truth really is, right? And today, I want to talk about the last part of what we've been covering for the last 2 weeks regarding the New Apostolic Reformation and how that is a communist generated strategy against the church with the intent to divide the church in an effort to destroy it. And there really is no question about that. It's pretty much irrefutable because it was initially Marxist and left-wing outlets that began this smear back in 2011. I cited very specifically Daily Kos and NPR. You can go back and listen to that. And I mean, I quoted not only the sources on the left, but then, unfortunately, the sources on the right who picked up this term and started to try to run with it a couple of years later. But it did start on the left. And as a result, we know Maoist insurgency doctrine and model. We know the fifth generation warfare is a battle of narrative and ideas. And we know that part of this is this narrative attack, again, with the intent of dividing so that internally they pick up the ball and run with it against their what should be allies. And this is how the Maoist insurgency doctrine works, the Maoist insurgency model works. I like to use, again, their own words for a lot of these things. And so as we kind of get into this next part of the NAR, I want to just do a very quick review. We talked about how really they use the guilt by association smear and the wrap-up smear as this tactic for this narrative attack. We also talked about the fact that they throw out terms like theocracy and theonomy, and they really don't have any clue what they're talking about. They've redefined the term. And so from theological perspectives, we talked about theonomy being about God's law, and at Christians, we actually want to obey God's law, and that theocracy is ruled by God. And what most of the time they're actually talking about when they throw out the term theocracy is an ecclesiocracy, which nobody that I know advocates the weird beards in Iran model of government being the government of the United States. No one I do. So that's called a straw man fallacy. It's putting up something that's completely fake and doing that. And in attempting to scare people that because I disagree with somebody, that they must be, therefore, this some sort of theocrat. And the other term that they threw out, and we talked about this a little bit, is the term dominionism. And then also the Seven Mountains idea. And they also throw out terms as well, and we're going to get into that here in a second, that, again, we're going to define today. So now that we know that the NAR started as a Marxist narrative attack, those Christians that are using it out there right now, you need to ask yourself, why on earth would I be part of a communist strategy to divide the church and try to destroy it within. Now, you have to ask yourself that question. Again, irrefutable, where it began. You can go back and look at this again in 2011. Take a look at the Daily Kos articles that I cited ad nauseum, as well as the NPR transcripts from the radio interviews at that time, which was, again, in context, in the run-up to the 2012 elections, where there happened to be charismatic candidates, Pentecostal candidates that were running for office. All right, so we're going to go next to the big bugaboo word. Again, on both sides, right and left, they always bring up this term, dominionism. And I want to, again, use C. Peter Wagner's own words. And this is kind of the same thing with like Lonnie Frisbee out there. There's a whole bunch of people knocking Lonnie Frisbee and ascribing things to him that he doesn't even believe. And you can go read what he says in his own words in his books. And one of his best friends actually just recorded a YouTube video talking about, I believe it was like one of the testimonies on his deathbed, what he actually believed about homosexuality and all these things. And so it's very clear he was a Christian, very clear that he was a repentant Christian, and very clear that he was not a person who subscribed to the homosexual lifestyle and considered it to be sin. And it was his own words. So again, we're going to use the same idea here with C. Peter Wagner. Again, this comes from an August 24th, 2011 article in Charisma Magazine about the word dominionism. Here's what he says. In terms of taking dominion, we wouldn't want to use the word dominion, but we wouldn't want to say that we have dominion as if we're the owners or we're the rulers of, let's say, the arts and entertainment mountain. Again, this gets to the 7 mountains. What we strive to do, and our goal, is to have people in the arts and entertainment mountain who are committed to the kingdom of God. So therefore, we use the adjective there, kingdom-minded believers. And our goal is to try to have as many kingdom-minded believers in positions of influence in the arts and entertainment mountain as possible. Would that not be a goal for the entire church to have Christian influence in the media industry? Travis, can I get an amen to that? And the reason for that is to help bring the blessings of heaven to all those in the arts and entertainment mountain. I don't even understand how any Christian, Bible-believing Christian, could believe opposite of that. But, okay, we're going to go to the next thing. August 19th, 2011, Terry Gross and Rachel Tabachnik were on NPR, and this is part of what I've read earlier, but this is on specifically dominionism. This is from the transcript of that radio interview. Here's what they say. I want you to pay attention to this. Dominionism is very controversial inside of the conservative and evangelical world. It's a specific theology that states that somehow God lost control of the earth when Satan tempted Adam and Eve in the garden, and that humans must help God regain control of the earth. And the way that they do this is by taking dominion over society and government. I'm going to move to the next. These are all leftist sites that I'm going to cite right now on what they say dominionism is, their definition. Wikipedia says dominion theology, also known as dominionism, is a group of Christian political ideologies that seek to institute a nation that is governed by Christians and based on the understandings of biblical law. Okay. Now, we get to the right. Holly Pivick. An article written February 24th, 2013. So this is kind of when the right started to pick up the narrative attack. This article was updated in 2019. Quote, thus critics of the NAR movement include not only traditional Christians, but also secular liberals. So now she's admitting the connection between the two. Do you see that? She's admitting the connection between the left and the right now, who fear that the NAR leaders are seeking to set up theocracies. There's that word again. And again, not cited and not defined right here. In Uganda, the United States, and other nations, the gospel of the kingdom is the NAR teaching that God, through Christ's death and resurrection, has made the way for Christians to take dominion of the earth. This is a redefined gospel. in contrast to the gospel of salvation from sin that historically has been taught by evangelicals. According to NAR teaching, God originally gave humanity dominion of the earth, a dominion that was lost at the fall. To that end, in these present times, the urgent mandate of God to the church is to actively engage in transforming society. Okay, so isn't that what Christianity is supposed to do? I mean, I just want to stop right here for just a couple of things. Why did Jesus have to come back? Why was Jesus given the title deed to the earth? Why did he have to come back? Okay, unless there was something that needed to be remedied, and it was more than sin. Now, it was sin, no question about it. But there's more here. And the prodigal son story very clearly actually outlines the redemption. Now, why would God have given Adam dominion back then? You can read this in Genesis 1. Why would he have done that? Only to just give up on it for all the rest of eternity. That would mean that God's vision failed. So she doesn't really answer that question in here theologically. Again, regardless of where you stand on this, that question is not answered here theologically. And then it continues with this. To that end, in these present times, the urgent mandate of God to the church is to actively engage in transforming society. Well, Christianity transformed Rome, transformed the Greco-Roman Empire. And how do I know that? Because you can't really go see the full, undestroyed temple of Artemis today. It's crumbled in ruins, and the temple prostitutes are gone. Why? Because of the influence, the transforming influence of Christianity. So this is an odd statement because Jesus Christ himself wanted to transform humanity and therefore society. Yet it should be emphasized that when NAR leaders talk about transforming society, as Wagner does here, they are not speaking merely of efforts to positively influence culture. Rather, they're speaking of efforts to control or take control of the earth's societal institutions, that is dominionism, end quote. Brandon House, August 23rd, 2015, Dangers of NAR and Dominionism. Quote, the New Apostolic Reformation has a radical commitment to electing so-called Christians to public office in order to establish a Christian government or theocracy for God's kingdom on earth. Well, that's not what the definition of theocracy is theologically, so that's a fallacy. And the interesting part about this, too, is so we're not supposed to elect Christians to office? Well, it just doesn't make sense. So, I'm going to get into the dangerous part of this, and then we're going to move to the international front here in a second. But I want to get to the dangerous part of this. There's Wikipedia had a quote from some folks that criticized the label of dominionist. And the reason they did is because radical Marxists, radical leftists and Marxists, were intentionally using it to smear the right in such a way as though they could justify wholesale persecution, censorship. Now remember, this was written years ago, and we're seeing now the fruit of this stuff back then. So again, if you're parroting this NAR narrative attack, you're actually coming in line with this intentional demonization of a segment of society so that it justifies persecution, censorship, and ultimately not just criminalization. But historically, we've seen when this kind of demonization takes place, like in Maoist China, it led to the wholesale slaughter of people. And that's not hyperbole. That's the end result of this stuff. So we have to be very careful here, again, as Christians, that we're not falling into this trap of just parroting narrative attacks. All right, so this is a quote from Wikipedia. Quote, those labeled dominionists rarely use the terms dominionist and dominionism for self-description, and some people have attacked the use of such words. So this gets into the next part of this of the attack. Okay, continuing the quote. The journalist and conservative commentator Stanley Kurtz, writing for the National Review, labeled it, quote, conspiratorial nonsense, end quote, political paranoia, end quote, and, quote, guilt by association, end quote, and decried Hedges' vague characterizations that allow him to paint a highly questionable picture of a virtually faceless and nameless dominionist Christian mass. So again, he's recognizing this is a narrative attack. Kurtz also complained about a perceived link between average Christian evangelicals and extremism, such as Christian Reconstructionism, the notion that conservative Christians want to reinstitutionalize slavery and rule by genocide. Is not just crazy, it's downright dangerous. So in other words, the left was saying that if you believe in dominionism, you want to reinstitute slavery and genocide, okay? That's known as projection, all right, especially coming from Marxists on the left. The most disturbing part of the Harper's cover story, the one by Chris Hedges, was the attempt to link Christian conservatives with Hitler and fascism. We've seen this over the last few years. Once we acknowledge the similarity between conservative Christians and fascists, Hedges appears to suggest, we can confront Christian evil by setting aside the old polite rules of democracy. So while conspiracy theories and visions of genocide are really excuses for the left to disregard the rules of democracy and defeat conservative Christians by any means necessary, end quote. All right, now, I'm going to kind of bring this part home. Then we'll move on to the international front. People who are using the NAR narrative attack and parroting it are quite literally becoming part of the Marxist plan to demonize Christians en masse. I mean, because then anybody can be a dominionist, right? As we read on the very first show talking about this, it was almost impossible to figure out who was part of the NAR because of all the massive varied definitions. And this is a hallmark characteristic of a narrative line attack because there's no way you can truly define anything. It's just, I disagree with that person, I'm going to smear them. So if Christians fall into this now, they're becoming literally part of the Marxist strategy to demonize a segment of the population and to set up the persecution of the Christian church. And I want to say something historically. This is exactly what happened in the former Soviet Union. It's exactly what happened in Germany, where you had the confessing church on one side, 3,000 pastors. You had 3,000 pastors who were sold out to the state, and then you had these 12,000 in the middle who basically said, yeah, those hotheads, we're not going to fight back on any names they're called. We're not going to fight back on any label they're given. We're just going to stay out of it. And as a result, literally millions of people died. And so, again, the key here is this was written years ago to set up where we're at right now. We're in the place right now where these people that have either written about the NAR, these people that have, on the left particularly, that have said that anybody who wants dominionism or believes in dominionism is somehow wanting to reinstitute slavery and rule by genocide, which is absolutely ludicrous. Literally no one I've ever talked to inside the church has ever said anything remotely close to this. But now you know why they attacked yours truly with this farcical, nonsensical, biblical basis for war narrative they had out there. Now, as I said before on this issue particularly, that with the biblical basis for war, it was clearly notes on Deuteronomy 20. In fact, I had an argument in a discussion with a lawyer on national radio, actually. And I just said, have you ever read Deuteronomy 20? And he said, no. And I said, so we can't have an intelligent conversation because these are clearly notes. It's all bullet pointed. A manifesto is never bullet pointed. But the other point behind this is that the person who leaked this to the media only leaked the one file. Okay, so they send one document out of 12 documents in a file talking about just war theory. So they take the one document out and they don't include the other ones. Well, that's a lie then. You have literally and intentionally taken it out of context. And I asked the media, why don't you publish the other 12 documents that are in that file folder? And so they want to set it up, again, this is the biblical basis for war. They want to set that narrative up that, these Christians, they want to set up a theocracy. They want to institute genocide and slavery. And so they try to take the biblical basis for war in the Old Testament. They always forget to put that part out. And they try to take it out of context and then put it into this narrative of the New Apostolic Reformation so that they can attack Christians, demonize Christians, divide the church with the intent of destroying it. And now today, so many people unwittingly are parroting this ridiculous NAR narrative that again, we've read it all. Literally no one I know believes the stuff that they have alleged. And in addition to that, they're taking the definitions completely, just making it up on their own. They're not taking the traditional theological definitions of terms. So now you understand why they attacked me, because if they would have published the other documents in that folder, they would have seen the just war theory. They would have seen analysis of the Battle of Cowpens, Revolutionary War, analysis of war in Vietnam. And they would have also seen the presentation that I gave in the military to soldiers deploying overseas regarding just war theory. They would have seen it all. But of course, they didn't publish those things. And that's because this is a narrative line attack. So to everybody out there right now that is falling into this trap, just bring it before the Lord. And, especially for the people that have been smeared, in the body of Christ, we're supposed to go with Matthew 18, and we're supposed to go to people if we have some sort of an offense or disagreement. We're not supposed to gossip about them publicly. And so I applaud people like Holly Pivick, who have actually been trying to talk to people that they're accusing of being the NAR. But also, on the other side of it, it's good to admit when you're wrong. And there have been some very clear fallacies here that have been exposed that just, these accusations just aren't true. So we're going to move now to the international front. And boy, we've got a few things here. My goodness. First of all, I'm just going to go to this, probably the most shocking thing, Travis. We can get that video queued up. We have this from the southern border, and then I'm going to get into what the plan is against President Trump here in a second. Here at the southern border, there's a young boy completely by himself that was found crossing over. I mean, it's just heartbreaking. And for those of you watching online, you can see this. But for those of you listening, I'm just going to describe it to you. There's a border agent, it looks like, that is talking to this young boy who's just completely by himself. And man, I cannot believe that this is not even more of a big deal. But this came to us from Twitter. Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, retired, posted this up. And the quote from the guy it's Jorge Ventura Media. Moments ago, we encountered a 2-year-old boy, unaccompanied minor, who was abandoned at the border, according to a migrant woman who found the boy. He was wearing a makeshift ID with a Louisiana address on it. I mean, we encountered them with a group of Chinese nationals who just crossed. I'm going to read that again. We encountered them with a group of Chinese nationals who just crossed. So again, the first part of 5th generation warfare, 4th generation warfare, is they're going to have attacks inside the United States. And this is going to bring up a couple of things that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. One of those is, how compromised is the White House by the Chinese? All right, I want to talk about the plan against President Trump. All right, here is what the enemy plan is. Okay, this enemy being defined as the spiritual forces of darkness that are coming against this country to try to destroy it, and their agents. Okay, Gateway Pundit. Now, I'm going to talk about two things. First is they're going to likely do the indictment tomorrow. And then Trump will surrender for arraignment next week. So the indictment will be this week, and then he will be arrested, and then he will be arraigned. A few weeks after this, their plan is to then indict Trump again, but this time regarding RICO and conspiracy charges against Trump's effort to challenge the 2020 election in Georgia. So they're going to go from this in New York to then indictments in Georgia. Then they're going to wait a few weeks. And then they're going to try to indict Trump regarding January 6th. Now, as we've seen from the video evidence that's come out, completely exonerating people like the shaman. And I mean, the fact is he was led around the Capitol by police officers, for goodness sakes. So you're going to see this happen and unfold over the next few weeks. Okay, their intent is to essentially have Donald Trump on trial during the election. All right. I want to talk about the second part of this, which is they're also going to try to incite, provoke, prompt a violent response from patriots, from Christians, so that they can round up the leaders under Trump and take them down as well. It's not just enough to take Donald Trump out. They want to take down the leaders below Donald Trump as well that are part of the MAGA movement. And so you can't fall into this trap. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do anything, because they're trying to scare us into doing nothing as well. And so one thing that is happening already is prayer rallies. Happened last night. Donald Trump came on. 3,000 pastors were on with the Pastors for Trump network. And I find it interesting it was 3,000 pastors, the same number as the Confessing Church in Germany. But prayer rallies are a fantastic thing. I know they're doing peaceful rallies as well on college campuses. College Republicans are organizing some of those. And so here's the key. When you get the guy who shows up that nobody has ever seen before, you get the guy that shows up that tries to jump in front of the parade, as it were, and all of a sudden claims some leadership. People are like, who is that, right? That's not the place that you want to be. That's not the rally that you want to be at, all right? The key is that we need to be peaceful, and the key is also you need to understand their play here, that they are trying to destabilize the United States prior to a broader world war. And that, as far as that's concerned, is the briefing. Now, I want to mention two things coming up. We have Passover celebration next week right here at On Fire Ministries, March 29th. And then also coming up, we have this Saturday, Family Policy Institute of Washington and their Crisis in Education Summit right here at On Fire Ministries. Travis is going to post a link if you want to register for that. If you're involved in homeschooling, Christian school, you've got kids in public school, government school. It's a great place to come to network and to learn about solutions about what you can do here in this environment and how we can train up our kids in the way they should go so that they do not depart from it. Now, I'm going to go ahead and jump back out here real fast because I want to talk about something that's happening in the Middle East here. So, a couple of things. Actually, I'm going to jump to Asia right now quickly first. All right. So, there is a pretty interesting development in that Putin is now calling Xi his dear friend, okay? And so they're trying to make this, the Chinese are coming together with the Russians, and the United States could have prevented that. Look, they were always friends. They were always working clandestinely together. This is detailed, literally detailed in 50 years of books, KGB archives. They have always been partners Anatoly Golitsyn even talked about this in his book, New Lies for Old. So just don't fall into the trap of thinking that somehow the United States could have prevented a Chinese-Russian part. They've always been partners, okay? It's just now out in the open where they've been working clandestinely before. It's now out in the open. Second thing is Japan, and this coming to us again from Twitter and several like OSINT Defender. Japan is now arming up, and they're now bringing a coalition together in Asia in anticipation for a broader war in the Pacific. U.S. is building bases on many islands now. The Philippines now is solidifying its northernmost islands that it can, and the Japanese solidifying their southernmost islands as they can. So you see just kind of the writing on the wall here, and all of this, again, because of the weak leadership out of the White House. Now, in the Middle East, watch the next couple of weeks, particularly to see if the meeting between Iran and Saudi Arabia gives another new announcement or new steps forward out of it. I mean, again, a sea change happening in the Middle East because of the weak leadership coming out of the White House. And that is the briefing. Remember, the antidote to dependency and socialism is to be a God-fearing, self-reliant, freedom-loving American. Thank you to everybody that has been praying for us, praying for the country, praying for President Trump. And always remember, you can find us on Podbean, Spotify, Amazon. You can find us on virtually every social media network. But if you find us, hit share, hit like, because that's how the information gets out. Don't presume people are getting this. And of all times in our history as a country, now is the time to get out the truth to as many people as possible. All right, it's my great honor once again to bring on John Guandolo of Understanding the Threat, one of the greatest, at least of our time, educational and practical implementation and action entities that exists in the United States, exposing the jihadi and communist networks primarily, and what we can do about them even at the local level. John, it's great to have you back on Patriot Radio. How are you doing, my friend?
Doing great. Thanks again for having me, Matt.
So let's talk a little bit about your thoughts on what's happening right now with President Trump and what that bodes in regards to our country here, just even in the next few weeks.
Well, I think the pressure and the activities towards indicting and arresting Mr. Trump, first of all, it's more evidence of the gross tyranny. If you read the legal basis for what they're trying to do by indicting Mr. Trump, it's a farce. And I think in reality, it won't hold up in any functional appellate court, but that's not the point. The point is they do want it to hold up. This is how the adversaries of liberty feel about patriots. And again, I think it's fair to begin the discussion. The movement, he did not create the movement, birthed him. And 2010, Tea Party, kind of storming Capitol Hill, and then a lot of those people flipped the bird to patriots. The patriot movement has, at that point began to realize that the people going to Washington, D.C. were corrupt. And the people that had already been there that supposedly were supposed to go and change the system, the patriots knew that both Republicans and Democrats that had been in D.C. for many years were corrupt, were not adhering to their oaths of office. They were not defending liberty and not abiding by the Constitution. So here we have a situation where really all key components of the government are grossly corrupted. They're operating in tandem with of our adversaries, and those inside the military, those inside the Congress, inside the FBI, CIA, DIA, those inside wherever that are actually speaking truth and standing up for liberty are the minority. And that's where we find ourselves.
And so now, I mean, we want to move to the next kind of obvious question. We have so many so many things in so many directions we could go. But the bottom line is there's now actual evidence tying President Biden's family to China. And as a former FBI agent, as a counterterrorism expert, what is your take on this whole issue of China Joe?
Well, just coming right out to address that issue, I've been there for a long time, and so I think that's worth sharing. But I also would say that it's not just the ties, it's the ties to the Ukraine, and remembering that the Ukraine was directly tied to the Trump-Russia collusion. The Union is not an ally of the United States, and that's a gross understatement. But I think the issue here is not just one administration. It's not Joe Biden. It's not just his vice president. I think if we looked at the complete U.S. Congress, when she, and arguably one of the most hardcore communists in the entire U.S. Congress, excuse me, but if we look at the way the entire adversarial movement, whether it's the communist, it's the jihadi movement, it's their collaborators and financiers, I think the fact many who don't understand your audience would be a significant, unique distinction from these people, but most understand how well coordinated these efforts are, and that the Republican establishment is deeply in this, as is the entire Democrat leadership. And so I think it's understanding that at the international level, the depth of these movements and the influence of the United States is so significant, and of state CIA that are at least 2 dozen members of the House and the Senate, including leadership working for entities that represent Chinese intel and military, the CCP, the Communist Democrats and Republicans. So I just think it's outrageous. It's treason. Again, as you and I have said in the past, it's going to be at the local level that we take back our communities at the local. No, we're not. It's going to be county by county, pieces of states by pieces of states, because that's the way we're fragmenting, and it's the only way we're going to get it back.
So right now, we see really a clear effort inside the United States to divide patriots, to divide even Christians, with the intent of destroying them. I mean, ultimately, that's what this is about. And as you said, I mean, the GOP establishment has been part of this, and the Democrats are clearly part of this. One of the mechanisms they've been using is our old friend, the Southern Poverty Law Center, which really isn't in the South. It's not about poverty, and really isn't a law center as such. Birthed out of some Marxist background, I'd like you to kind of take us into how the SPLC has kind of been attacking here recently, and then kind of an ironic turn that the SPLC took here just a couple of weeks ago.
Right, that's a great question. So the Southern Poverty Law Center, certainly in the last decade, and I would argue longer, but it's been more obvious in the last decade, has proven to be a corrupt, pro-Marxist organization in the United States that is a hammer for the communist movement against patriots. That's the most succinct way I know to share who they are. Keeping hundreds of $millions in offshore accounts for which they've been exposed in the media. The Department of Defense and the FBI actually backing away from them because of their specious activities and their nefarious activities. And then, of course, the unique recent some are calling it a turn of event. I call it just normal business for them because they got caught. One of their attorneys getting charged with domestic terrorism, which shouldn't be a surprise. They're the terrorists. The Southern Poverty Law Center, as we at Understand the Threat have written, they are the ones going after people like you and me and our organizations. They're the ones who make up hundreds of organizations in America. They say they're hate groups, terrorists, or give them these titles when in fact they are the corrupt terrorist support. They support Hamas, doing care policies that support America's enemies and other label. And so, the truth is coming, but this is true. We were speaking years and we're hammered by how court guns and backing so open you can't deny it anymore. Who these people are. They are the enemies of liberty, but they have been for most of their career, I would argue.
Well, and these titles like Muslim bashing bigot John Guandolo, right? So I mean, very obviously very outlandish kind of things, but what they don't really want is people talking about the actual jihadist threat in America, the actual threat from Islam that is endemic to it in America. I mean, that's just what they don't want people to know about. So they attack. I'd like to give you just an opportunity to kind of address that SPLC headline, and then we're going to get to what they called me. Well,
I'll just go back to what we shared with the SP is the same thing we've shared with the leaders of Hamas doing business as CARE and other Muslim Brotherhood organizations. One thing teach, or we that's factually untrue. And what happened, Ibrahim Hooper, communications director for Hamas doing business as CARE, or any of these other people, what we teach or say or in our training or in our Ds or in my books, that's factually untrue. So you can call us any name you want, but they can't come back. And we at Understanding the Threat, as you know, have a standing offer. If anybody can demonstrate that we're teaching or training that's factually untrue, stop training it and give the person who brings it to our attention $1,000 cash. And in the 4+ years we've been doing this and emailing leaders of CARE about it, their only response has been name calling, because they know that what we're saying about them and about the Muslim Brotherhood movement, about the communist movement, is factually true. It's locked down, rock solid. There's nothing they can do about it, because as a former FBI special agent and investigator, that's the way you build a statement of facts, is with facts. And they can't touch that.
So, yeah, exactly. And so then, they attack me, of course, because, and this is the headline, it was, embattled Washington Rep Matt Shea is skirting state law to funnel campaign funds to far-right groups. Well, what they were actually talking about is something quite legal, actually, and that is campaign donations that are surplus donations going to 501c3 organizations that are registered in the state of Washington. And so it's fascinating. They try to paint this, again, picture. But the reason I think they were so upset at this is because they were projecting this is exactly what they're doing, right? That's why they were mad.
Right.
And so I think this kind of tells us a little bit of the formula that we should be using on our side of supporting ourselves, but also coming into a unity in the movement, which I know you've had to fight against for so long.
Well, I agree. I agree with your assessment. And a key strategy for both the Islamic movement and the communist movement accuse you of doing what they're doing. And this is especially true of the communists. You can read it in Rules for Radicals, which operationalizes the current communist movement in the United States in a large part. And doing. We saw that from communists like Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and others. And these people are real communists. These people like John Podesta, these people are real communists. And they're advancing the communist movement in the United States in real significant ways. And so that's I think the first that's important. I think part of the reason there is the belief that is because there are many people who still think Republicanship is a part of that movement. They are not. Mitch McConnell, McCarthy, Romney, Ronna McDaniel, the chairman of the national GOP, Lindsey Graham, Nikki Haley, George W. Bush. These people are not on the side of patriots. They're regurgitating communist narratives. They are taking the position of this movement, and therefore, whether they intend to or not, if you are fighters from the enemy camp at the friendly camp, whether you intend them to get it or not, you're part of the enemy side. So, in this war, and, what's amazing, I will reiterate this, in my experience just in life, I've never seen or read about any effort so well coordinated as these movements, the communist and Islamic movement working seamlessly at the local level across the United States, from the westernmost border of Washington State down to Florida, and from to California, Arizona, Nashville, Tennessee, to Wichita, Kansas, is incredibly well coordinated, well funded. In part because they've been unopposed by the very party, the party of Lincoln, for freedom, free market economy, and the ideal of the nation and the law enshrined in the Constitution. Yet they're not, and they haven't for at least, I would argue, 2 decades. It's probably longer. Leadership has grossly failed, and make great headlines when they're, bad guys are in front of the committee and they pound their table and call Fauci and the Secretary of Homeland General, big speeches, and they put them under the spotlight. When those people leave the spotlight, they go right back to doing what they were doing with no consequences. Nobody's in jail. And nobody's going to jail. And if you're a patriot out there and you think, well, they got this thing happening, and Joe Biden, the guy who's playing Joe Biden, he's actually he's a double of Joe Biden and all this. You are so off the rocker. Nobody's going to jail. You clean up your county. This is lost at the local level. And if you think there's something happening at the federal level, I'm saying what you're smoking, but I like some of it, because it means you were lost in La La Land. And I think it's shocking how many patriots do not understand how bad the situation is. The federal key components of government are controlled by our adversaries. You win or lose this, you run in your account, kick them out. If you've got Democrats in there, all lawful means available to you, and you abide by the Constitution, and that's what we're doing right now. That's where we are right now.
So abiding by all lawful means and abiding by the Constitution and taking the fight locally, taking the action locally. What are kind of the top 3 things people should do here in the last few minutes that we have left to really to join that fight locally? Because we are in a battle. We're in a battle for the survival of the republic. I don't think there's any question about that now.
Yes, so I agree. And I would argue we're in a constitutional republic. I can't see any good argument that the federal government is operating constitutionally based on the founding principles articulated in law in the Declaration. So with that said, you know me, both professionally and personally. Reality is that if there were something better to do, be putting my full effort behind it. I believe the best thing people can do is use our training at understanding the threat to organize as a team at the local level, to learn how to identify the adversaries of liberty at the local level, the communists, jihadis, their collaborators, take real civic action against them. And through this program, you not only learn how to organize and how to do those things, flush the bad guys out, reestablish the founding principles in law at the local level, but you also learn to operate as a unit, how to communicate, how to consider security options. These are things I know some people in your community have been doing uniquely more than most communities around the country, but most counties are not doing that. Most local communities are not. So that's what I believe is the best thing. I do believe, all these things that are happening. Hey, we're removing this guy from city council or school board, or we're doing this. That's great, but you're playing whack-a-mole. The thing that we bring to the table is a coordinated effort. So I think that is the key. And the other thing I would say is, you cannot merely focus on issues and policies. What we are doing is helping local communities focus on the root, those entities, the bad guys in the community, showing you the root of those issues. Because as soon as you square those issues and policies away, they've got 100 more. They'll just throw your way. So the organizations and individuals in leadership positions behind the anti-gun movement, by the pro-abortion movement, the stripping Christianity out of your community, taking away your right to freely express yourself, putting sexual deviant teachings and communism in elementary school. It's the same group of people. It is that cabal of communist jihadis or collaborators and financiers. You have to focus 95% of your effort on them. We teach you how to do that.
Where can people go to find out more about understanding the threat and also about any upcoming trainings you guys have?
Go to understandingthethreat.com. Right there at the homepage, there's a huge bar, Into Action Training. You click on it, and it'll give you the upcoming dates, or you can say, bring that to my community. Click on there, send us info, and we will reach out to you.
That's awesome. John Guandolo, thank you so much for joining me on Patriot Radio today. Really appreciate everything you guys are doing. And, I think that there are so many Americans waking up, they are going to fail. But we have to act now. This is something we can't wait on. So I thank you for your sense of urgency. God bless you guys and keep up the fight.
God bless you and all your viewers.
All right, John Guandolo, Understanding the Threat, understandingthethreat.com. If you have not heard of them, they have put together quite a team of experts. Check it out, understandingthethreat.com, and just get involved. As he was saying, it's the same group of people is the same group that is behind what you're facing, from the school boards to the higher taxes to allowing continual persecution of Christians in certain communities. Same group of people. And if you understand that, and you can understand how to fight back and uphold the Constitution of the United States so that we actually preserve this great republic for the next generation. Now, I want to go quickly online just to a couple new things right now. This just in, looks like came in, looks like this morning officially, but it's coming up, at least for me right now. FITUX News and then OSINT Defender both. India was able to repel a Chinese military incursion in contested border territory in the Himalayas late last year due to unprecedented intelligence sharing with the United States military. So we talked about on this show how the Indian military and the U.S. military are working together And now, it's being reported, I guess the original report came from U.S. News, is that it was U.S. intelligence that helped the Indian military to push back on the Chinese. I am sure that big escalation, as OSINT Defender puts it, in U.S. and Indian military cooperation is not going to go unnoticed by China. Last but not least, I want to talk quickly about the banking situation. So as many of you saw, UBS bought out Credit Suisse because they were on the verge of collapse. Now, again, that word collapse being thrown out there. Here is where this is getting kind of hinky. It looks very clear that they want to collapse regional banks here in the United States to consolidate into a few banks at the national level and then roll out the central bank digital currency. Now, one of the indicators of that is the announcement by the Fed last week of FedNow. FedNow program is essentially an instantaneous settlement program, which was kind of the precursor to central bank digital currency, instantaneous settlement of all transactions. So because we're starting to see this roll out, we can kind of see what's happening and that they're not going to, have a bunch of bank collapses all at the same time. But what's going to happen is, in fact, they're going to have a few now, a few more. And that just tells us that our preparedness situation really should involve things, again, not financial advice, but things that hedge against those things like gold and silver. I talked about privacy coins last night, but gold and silver is always a good option in a currency collapse. This is Matt Shea. Thank you for joining me today on Patriot Radio. May God bless all of you. And He is making this generation the greatest one. The awakening is here.